You're listening to WCEG Network, where we speak worldwide community empowerment group, where we speak life into the community. Log us on WCEGTalkRadio.com. Watch us live on your smart television, on Roku, cable channel, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, and now on Fanbase and Blue Sky. Search us on WCEG and subscribe to all media social platforms. I am your host, Damita Chatman, for the next hour, where we speak life into the community. Download us on free WCEG mobile apps, Lexus Play, WCEG Talk Radio, LinkedIn, WCEG, on any of your 12 podcast platforms. Last but least, this is the disclaimer. Anything that's said today will be the opinions of the host and the guest and not the producer of the show. Thank you so much, Senator McLaurin, for coming out today and getting taking my call. Matter of fact, you're going to be on the season finale today. Thank you, Senator Josh McLaurin. Let's go. Give me a 1 minute brief about you.
Sure. Well, I'm honored to be here, Ms. Chapman. Thank you. This is a great opportunity to introduce myself to some folks. My name is Josh McLaurin. I grew up in Georgia, went to UGA for undergrad, went to law school after that. I grew up in Cobb County, was born in a Northside Hospital, unincorporated Atlanta, now Sandy Springs. And I've been back in Georgia ever since 2016. I spent, like I said, a couple years out for law school and then did 1 year in New York. And now I'm back practicing law, and I've been serving the state legislature for 7 years. This is my 7th year. I've got, 4 years in the House and 3 years in the state Senate. So I've gotten to know the legislative side of the state very well, and I'm running to be Lieutenant Governor of Georgia in 2026. That's basically just the president of the Senate. So it's a person that stands up there with a gavel and conducts business on behalf of the Senate. So the reason I want to do it is I think we need leaders who have energy, who take a stand, as it were, and who fight. I think a lot of people are worried that their leaders are not fighting for them right now. And that's something I have a reputation for doing. I'm loud and proud in the Senate. And I every now and then tell them what they need to hear. So that's what I want to continue as Lieutenant Governor, and I want to stand up to the chaos that's happening in Washington.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna second that because I've been watching you and have endorsed you several times, and you're doing a great job. Let me ask you this: I did some research on you this morning, and I know that you took the former President Carter's. You represent the area that he had. Is that correct?
Well, so I have the same number. So the Senate district is the same number. They're numbered 1 to 56.
Okay.
And so his was 14 and mine is 14. Now they move that number around the state a lot. So I represent North Fulton County from basically Phipps Plaza in North Atlanta up to Alpharetta, Old Milton Parkway. So it took me 3 years to figure out that the easiest way to say that is exits 2 to 10 on Georgia 400. That's the fastest way to say it. But obviously, the former president represented Plains, Georgia, so a little bit different district. But when I found out I had the same number, that was an honor, to have that legacy.
Great. Let me ask you, you're a senator. Tell me, what do you think about what's going on right now?
It's wacky. It's completely crazy. I mean, Americans should have known what they were going to get after round 1 of the Trump administration. I mean, he was testing limits and boundaries then, but he's taking it to a whole new level now. I mean, this tariff stuff is crazy. Like this morning, we got the news on the tariffs that he and China worked out a deal to get the tariffs down some. But, when you're coming from 140 something percent tariffs, which is a tax, right, on consumers and small businesses, and all you do is you take that down to 30%, that's still a 30% tax. They're trying to make it seem like things are less crazy by starting out super crazy and then moving it back just a little bit. But nobody's fooled by that. I mean, all it is just kind of a chaotic policy. What it does is it creates a lot of uncertainty, because even if the stocks rebound some, or even if things sort of come back to normal a little bit, small businesses don't know whether to make orders overseas for all the things they need, the inputs to do business here, because they don't know if they're going to get hit with another tariff in the next, month or so. So there's a real unpredictability to what's happening right now, and that's really what's hurting consumers and small businesses the most. So I think it's crazy.
Do you think working as a senator right now? Do you think some of the senators are having remorse?
I think so. Here's what I'll tell you. I mean, you've had elected Republicans on. I know that you work with people from all parties. But the thing that I want voters to know about elected Republicans is some of them privately agree that what's going on with Trump is crazy, but they just won't say anything about it because their politics won't let them. And, I have some consultants who will say, hey, when you run against Republicans, you need to paint them as extreme, like, oh, they're extreme this, extreme that. I do think some of their policies are extreme, but I think the smarter way to run against Republicans right now is to say they know this is crazy, but they're not speaking up. They're not saying anything, and there's a real courage deficit. I think people are really disenchanted with politicians right now for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is y'all don't speak your mind. It's like you may know something's wrong, but you don't say it, you don't talk about it. And so one of the problems with what our current state leadership is they are hamstrung by their politics. They are not allowed, in their view, to say the truth, which is that Trump is crazy. He's a narcissist. He's going to drive this country in the ground before he, stops taking care of himself. And he's inviting his billionaire friends like Elon Musk to go steal your social security data and enrich themselves with billions of dollars of contracts while people are looking the other way. So we need people with courage. We need people who can say the truth out loud.
I thought about that, before I got ready to go to do the show. I thought about how people would sit down with you, eat with you, knowing that they don't agree with you, but they go along just to get along and won't say nothing. And as I was looking in the mirror, I was like, Damita, would you do that? That's why right now I'm not popular, because see, I can't sit and don't say nothing. And I think that's the problem now. Like you say, people don't have the courage to stand up. Let me ask you a question. Uh, I know some bills that you have guys have passed down at the Senate. Was it hard crossing over the aisle with the Republicans on some of the bills?
Well, I'll say that the Senate ends up passing a lot more what you would call culture war legislation, right? Which is like, hot button divisive issues because the senators they look in the mirror and they think they're all going to be governor, right? And so they want to shore up their primary support, with their base, the Republican base, and then they pass a lot of these bills. So they're focusing on LGBTQ issues, they're focusing on guns, they're trying to make the case that they're the most Trump-like or MAGA, people. And so for those bills, yeah, it's hard to be in the room because they're playing politics and you vote no politely and maybe you give a speech where you tell them what you really think about it. But at the end of the day, right now, Senate Republicans have 33 votes and Democrats have 23 votes. So they're going to get their way 99% of the time. But you gotta dissent, you gotta respectfully but forcefully object when those bad bills come through. But you also have to realize that the second that vote is over, there's another vote that we might all agree on. There's going to be legislation that we call it green board because the whole board of everybody's names for the vote turns green because everybody voted yes. So sometimes that happens. A lot of times we have unanimous votes. So you got to keep your head on your shoulders and realize there is a moment to dissent. There is a moment to object forcefully. But then the next moment, you got to do the people's business. You got to work. And so you got to make sure to keep those relationships so that you can work across the aisle on the stuff that people need us on.
So let me ask you, 9 times out of 10, anything that's come over to the House, the Senate, if you don't have the majority of the votes, 9 times out of 10, it probably won't pass. Is that correct?
That's right. And the thing is we get questions from our base all the time. Our Democratic voters like, why aren't you fighting harder? Why aren't you doing something? You got to stop all this stuff. And look, we give it everything we've got. I mean, we lobby against the bills with our colleagues privately. Like you don't see all the work we're doing necessarily, but we'll be in the ante room saying, hey, while we're getting a cup of coffee, like, are you sure you have to vote for this? Is there any way that we can figure out a way to make this bill less bad or to, try a different approach? And we're always trying to figure out our angles so that we don't have to vote for something we don't want to vote for. But then, we give speeches and we use the power of media. We try to amplify the dissent, not just our words and comments, but those of our voters and our constituents. They come to the Capitol, they tell, and in some cases, really profound personal stories that are really difficult to tell. We try to amplify their voices so that we can weigh on the public conscience so that people can, say, we don't want this bill. So then if they pass it, they get electorally punished for it, right? So there's a lot of things we can do, but at the end of the day, just like you say, if they're intent on doing something and they've got the votes to do it, then that's how democracy works, right? If you're in the minority party, you lose a lot and you just get used to that. But what I love about being in the minority party and what I'm excited about bringing, skill wise to the lieutenant governor role is that formal power is not all there is to it. It's not all about do you have the numbers, do you have the votes? It's also about persuasion, about moral authority and moral force and the ability to speak truth to power. Because if you can shape the debate, the narrative effectively, you can change public opinion and you can make sure that the people are informed about what's happening at the Capitol. And then the people can show up either in the Capitol or in the streets with protest signs, but you can make your will known as the public, and that will help to curb some of the majority's worst impulses. So there's one thing you learn when you're in the state legislature is there's a lot of ways to exercise power. It's not just the mathematics of who's got more votes, but that certainly does matter a lot.
Now let me ask you, this year down at this under the Gold Dome during the first 3 months that you was there, I know one bill passed by one of the junior senators that just came on, and that was Senator Kemp.
That's right. He
And
did great.
so, how did that feel? A new senator coming in and getting something passed on the first go round.
I think that's amazing. I think it's a testament to his leadership. I joke with him actually at the beginning of session because I'm the only senator or representative in the entire Georgia legislature who voted against the rules because I think some of the rules are stacked, and so I wanted to register my dissent, but I was the only one. Now, I've been there 7 years, so people know me, so they don't get mad when I do some, stuff like that. But
Okay.
I joke with Senator Kemp. I was like, why don't you come along with me and vote no on the rules? But he was too smart for that. He was like, no, no, I'm not going to follow your crazy games. I'm going to vote yes on the rules like everybody else. So he maintained good relationships with the majority. And then he was able to do something that education advocates have been working on for a while, which is to eliminate what's called 3Qing from our reading protocols or learning, curriculum. So basically there's a way of, I'm not the education expert, Senator Kemp is, but it's a type of teaching reading that just wasn't getting results, that was actually counterproductive, but some teachers were using it out of, tradition or habit. And so we have updated now, I believe the governor signed it. So it will now be the law that will use better techniques or approaches to teaching kids how to read. And you can thank Senator Kemp for that. Again, a freshman senator in
Yeah.
the minority party just really speaks to his ability to work across the aisle.
Right. Let me ask you, what do you think about the Medicaid expansion and so forth like that? What do you think
Well, we
about
got to
all?
do it. I mean, here's the thing. The Affordable Care Act, I believe you're referring to under the Affordable Care Act, which was passed during the Obama administration. There were a lot of aspects to that law that were very important for healthcare in this country, but one of them was that right now Medicaid eligibility goes up to 100% of the poverty line, and we wanted to bring it up to 138% of the poverty line, which it's pretty low actually, but it captures a lot of people in terms of people who really need healthcare, who are working maybe multiple jobs, 2, 3 jobs. And so if you bring it up to 138%, the projection is that we would cover up to maybe 500,000 Georgians. I mean, that's a lot. Maybe 3, 4, 500,000 Georgians who currently don't have health insurance would have health insurance, which would mean a lot of things. It would mean rural hospitals don't have to close because they've got a problem with indigent care, meaning people who can't afford for their treatment. The hospitals are going out of pocket to pay for those folks because federal law is you can't turn people away. We've already made the decision that if you show up to an emergency room, you get treatment because we're a humane country where we don't just let people die in the streets, or we try not to, right? So the hospitals are supposed to treat everybody. Well, what do they do if people can't pay? So we got to expand Medicaid so that those hospitals don't have to close. And the other thing is it's a great return on our investment. 90% match if it comes up to 138%. So the federal government would be paying for 90% of the bill. But when I say the federal government, I'm talking about us because it's our federal tax dollars that Georgians have already paid. So you want to talk about, fiscal or conservatism or budgeting smartly. we've already paid this money to the federal government for the care, but because of our state leaders, our Republican leaders' refusal to expand Medicaid, we're not getting that money back. So that federal money is going to pay for other people because we're not paying for our own health care. So, and Senator Ossoff and Warnock, they both sweetened the pot by adding over $1 billion in incentives in the first couple of years if we were to expand Medicaid. So all the cards are on the table, and they've been on the table for over a decade. It makes perfect sense for us to expand Medicaid. The problem is that now that Republicans have been blocking it for a decade, they make it sound like this tired old talking point, but it couldn't be more critical. You know, when Wellstar closed in downtown Atlanta, it was one of two, level one trauma centers in the Atlanta area, and they had to shut their doors. Now, they acknowledge that Medicaid expansion wouldn't have saved them 8, 9 years into it. But if we had expanded Medicaid when we were supposed to, under the Affordable Care Act, that hospital wouldn't have closed. And they admit that that's true. And the same story is playing out all across the state. So it's the most obvious thing we could be doing. And look, I don't know why state Republicans probably had something to do with Obama, is probably why they don't want to do it. But the bottom line is it's the most common sense thing that we could do the second that Democrats get the majority back.
Let me ask you a question. And if you don't want to answer this, you don't have to. What do you think about reparations?
I think we need them. I think that you got to be smart about how to do it because obviously that would be a huge program. But look, there are people who are able to explain this a lot more clearly than I am. But it's a couple old folks living back to back between us and slavery in this country, right? I mean, it's our parents and grandparents lived through the civil rights struggle. If you're somebody my age, the idea that we are over the effects of slavery or what has happened in this country is naive. It's really an attempt at repressing the truth. And so, I think that there needs to be some sort of systematic recognition that inequality, racial inequality in this country exists for a reason. And until we make a concerted effort to rebuild and respond to the damage that has been done, then we don't really have justice. So, like I say, I don't know what the program looks like, but if you ask me a simple yes or no question on that, my answer is yes.
Okay. Let me ask you a question because you go down to the Georgia under the Gold Dome and you pass and see what I see. Have you guys ever thought about dealing with that homeless problem down there with folks laying under them bridges and etc.?
So I think, and to your point, isn't it ironic that when you go to like Washington, D.C., or you go to a state capital of a state, that in some cases you see more homelessness almost right next to where the lawmakers are than other places? I think that is such a deep irony, but not really that ironic because I think it goes to show how, when power is exerted on behalf of special interests, big business, the normal grind of how power works, it leaves the little guy behind. It leaves people who are in the most need oftentimes behind. And then the homelessness problem, to have people who are unhoused right by a legislature, really creates a visual that shows how serious that is. We've got we've obviously got some resources in the Atlanta area. I'm thinking of Atlanta right by the state capitol to deal with the problem, but certainly not enough. And, we still have a long way to go in using alternatives to policing, diversionary programs, mental health first responders. There's so many things that we could be doing to give people more of a chance because right now, especially under Republican leadership, where they haven't seen a new felony they didn't like, trying to criminalize everything, the Republicans' answer to poverty right now is throw people in jail. It's, well, you don't have the money to post cash bail, then you got to spend a night in jail. They don't want to invest in the alternative resources.
Keep on talking. I'm going to hook my
Sure.
laptop
Yeah.
up. I didn't have it. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Do you think that instead of like right now, we're finna get ready for the World Cup and they're moving
Can you give us, can you elaborate a little bit until Ms. Chapman comes back, please?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Looks like she's frozen. Maybe her power went out.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry here. Yeah, we were just talking about the how many unhoused folks are around the Capitol, and just the problem with a poverty trap that people can't get out of sometimes, right? Um, there's other countries have experimented with, free housing for people to try to invest in.
Thought I had it. I thought I had it hooked up. Let me ask you.
Yeah,
Do
go
you
ahead.
think right now, if you didn't hear my question, they're getting ready for the World Cup, and it was brought to my attention. I got an email that now they're trying to clean up the different areas down there on those intersections. Why do you think we clean up areas when we want to show off and show and tell, but after the show and tell is gone, you don't do anything to the problem? So tell me, what do you think? What do you think is going on? Do you think the federal government and these different areas should step in?
Well, your question sort of answers itself to some extent, which is this, this always happens when you have a showcase event in a city anywhere, right? Is that local and state leaders want to put on the best show that they can, or the best foot forward for international visitors, that sort of thing. And so that's why they, try to do what they do. What I will say is, to your point, some of these problems you can't hide. You can maybe superficially, briefly move people around or try to make it look like the problem's not there, but ultimately the problem is still there. And we've got to be cognizant as we do big development, economic development, try to attract big business or big events. We've got to be cognizant that if we let inequality get too bad in this country or in this state, that we are not going to be able to hide it. Like, at some point, if you only take care of the big business, the big international sponsors, then you are leaving behind people who are they're not going to be invisible. They're not going to go away. And so I think what this country really needs is a come to Jesus on, what are we doing about the have-nots? There's the haves and the have-nots, and billionaires and oligarchs are running the show right now. And I'm not a big historian or like student of history, but I know enough to know we had the Gilded Age, 100 years ago, where robber barons were taking what they wanted from the country and not leaving enough for the rest of everybody. And that always ends in disaster if you let that inequality grow too wide. And so I know I kind of zoomed out a little bit from your World Cup question, but I think, yeah, it's emblematic of a larger issue, which is that until we care about, what does Matthew say, the least of these, until we really provide for the least of these, we will have visible problems that we will not be able to hide.
Let me. I'm gonna switch gears on you. Let me ask you. We have a big thing right now in the South Fulton area of data centers. I want to hear your perspective on these data centers, and this is going to be two-part question.
Sure.
Do you think that these data centers should be put in communities next to homes?
Well, they're loud, right? They can be, depending on, or they use a lot of energy, right? And they don't create a lot of jobs, right? So we got to be careful that these don't become blight that we allow to go to communities that don't have as much organizing or political power to keep them away. And we really got to question, because I know there's been some state legislation around data centers and sort of providing tax benefits or credits. And the sponsors say, oh, it's jobs, it's going to bring jobs. It's not that many jobs. And, one of the things I worry about, Chat GPT, everybody's using Chat GPT and AI now, but it uses a tremendous amount of energy. Rather than do the reading ourselves in school, right? We are letting a computer do our thinking for us, and that thinking is costly. It means a lot of energy and a lot of space for servers and creating these new types of developments. So I am not a fan of the developments in general. I don't believe they hold a lot of promise for creating jobs. And to your point, I do worry about the location of them. We got to make sure that we respect the communities that people are trying to put these by.
Let me ask you a question. Since you represent up on the north, and this is the south side, do you see a lot of data centers going in communities up on the north side?
I think that in the legislature, we would say the gentlelady knows of what she speaks. You are making a good point, which is that They are not going to be coming up to a dense suburban, single family home community in Sandy Springs or Roswell. That is not where these data centers are going to be located.
I'm not going to put you on the hot seat, but I want you to say that one more, as the folks say in the church, one more again. I want you to say that one more again.
Oh yeah, they are not going to put these data centers in suburban communities, like in my district, for example, Sandy Springs or Roswell. I mean, that is not the kind of place where they will end up, to your point. And so we've got to be clear-eyed. I mean, so a lot, like I said a minute ago, a lot of what we do is amplifying. We got to get the word out so people know, because if people don't know, how can they react, right? And so we got to make sure that it is known how these decisions are being made so we can respond to them.
Okay. And I don't want nobody, my viewers, to hold that question on the senator. I asked the question. I knew the answer, but I wanted to hear from somebody else, because they think I know it all. Let me ask you, why do you think, and you don't have to answer if you want to, why do you think elected officials is pushing these data centers into our communities?
What I will say, and this is more of a commentary on the whole process, is that if you are a big business interest and you are willing to play political ball, you know what I mean, at the legislature, that means money, and you have a story to tell about how you're going to help with jobs or improving the economy somehow, that goes a really long way in the legislature, right? Big business, willing to play ball, talking about jobs. Those interests move. And I think that the elected officials speak that language, that currency of power, which is money and business. But it's also why you get these big corporate handouts, tax incentives that go to these businesses that may or may not end up developing. I mean, look at Rivian, the automaker, with all the uncertainty about, are they going to make, put the big plant in worth billions of dollars? The question that doesn't get asked a lot of times at the state level when those tax incentives are given out, how are you going to house people? Where's the affordable housing going to go? Where, who's paying for the utilities build out so that you can have a real community there with working utilities? And when you go to the city government's conference, GMA, Georgia Municipal Association, you'll hear the cities ask this question. Maybe it's great to get jobs for the larger statewide community, but who's going to pay for all the stuff that has to support that development? And so, to your point, the political process is really designed to do one thing, and that is reward people with influence and give them what they want. And so when the big businesses come, they put money in the political process, they get what they want, which is the development with the tax benefits where they want it. But the rest of the picture, what happens to the community around it, a lot of times local governments and ordinary people are left, picking up the bag for that.
Okay. Let me ask you, it was a Facebook comment. Did you hear about the U.S. House members that present a bill about Medicare today?
Oh, no, tell me more.
I guess our colleagues thought we are the number one place to do business. However, we don't seem to be the number place to take care of the constituents. Basically, these I'm going to probably say these elected officials, they make all these promises, but they don't take care of their constituents.
Well, and in some cases you get lies, just outright lies, which are, the Trump Republicans in Washington saying, oh, we're not going to cut Medicare, Social Security, don't worry about it. And then what? And now they're talking about, oh, well, some Republicans are saying we'll limit the amount that we cut it to, 500 billion or something like that. 500 billion, that's going to be the limit? I mean, I think, to your point, people are fed up with this idea that, again, I say oligarchs and billionaires, but the people who want the tax cuts for the rich, like those folks do not care if Medicare and Social Security get cut. And that what they're trying to figure out is how to get away with doing it where people don't notice, right? Because they know if people really knew what was happening, what they were trying to do, it would be massively unpopular. You'd have people from both parties saying, we don't want that. And instead they're trying to, sneak it through anyway. So yeah, I mean, it's a 5-alarm fire in DC when it comes to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. because if you don't live on those checks, the people who don't depend on those checks monthly do not know what it's like, and do not know how scary it is to think that their safety net will be ripped out from under them.
Okay. Let me ask you, what have you do if what do you think about opening more programs for these young children to get them off the street? What do you think about that?
Anything that's going to benefit community by allowing more interactions and intersections between community, I'm all for. I mean, I very publicly, I lament constantly what cell phones have done to our society. I mean, if you ever go out to a diner and you're sitting at the bar or you're on public transit or you're anywhere, what are we all doing? You know,
Cell phones.
we got the phone right in front of our face. It used to be that you had to talk to people and find ways to get out of the house or the apartment and go join a club. You know, I mean, there's a book called Bowling Alone from a couple decades ago where a political scientist talks about how we used to have all these ways of getting involved with each other. And what that did, it didn't just keep us busy, to your point, keeping people out of trouble. It also gave us different identities. You know, you might be in a bridge club with somebody who has a different political view, but they're your friend. You get to know them. You care about their family, right? You care about what's going on with them in their lives. So then if they have a different political view, you don't think of them so much as an enemy. So this type of overlapping identities and intersections is so critical for our democracy, for the health of our democracy. And to your point, it also keeps kids who are, you know, worried about what am I going to do after school, that kind of thing, like a club or a sport, you know, it gives people a way to connect with others and something to believe in and invest in. And instead of sort of losing faith that, you know, society's got nothing for me and I might as well be doing something else. So anything we can do as a state, as local governments to create those opportunities, make them available is a really big deal.
Let me ask you, this year has been, well, last year, November, I mean, it just took like a tornado to the United States. What do you think the Democrats can do to help bring this country back together again?
I'm so glad you asked. Let me start with what I think Trump is doing. It's been 10 years now that he's been dominating the landscape. So I think Democrats need to understand him and respond to him and what he represents. The reason I think people trust Trump, now I don't think they should, but I think that people trust him because he presents as authentic. And the reason is not because he is authentic. We're talking about a Democratic New York billionaire who, you know, used to support abortion, right? So like this man will say whatever he needs to because he's a narcissist. But the reason people think he's authentic is because he's got no filter, right? He'll just say whatever comes into his head. And I think people realize, hey, he may be an a-hole, but at least I know he is because he's saying whatever comes into his head, right? Democrats need to find a way to create that sort of authenticity so that when they talk to people, when we talk to people, people know that what they see is what they get, right? That we are not carefully, you know, writing out all our speeches and we're poll testing everything. We're being careful. We're trying to figure out how to stay in power. People are done with that. I think people really want to see leaders who are energetic, have a good sense of humor, are willing to say what's on their mind and not filter it carefully. But the double thing that Democrats have to do that Republicans aren't having to do right now is we got to be empathetic. We've got to both have no filter and care about people, right? So like authentically be good people capable of leading. And I think one reason a lot of Democrats are scared of that is because, you know, some Democrats did not get far into office by being, you know, really empathetic, good people. And so there's this worry that some Democrats have, like, oh, if I really spoke my mind, if I really said what was on my mind, maybe people wouldn't like it. And so they're scared. Well, we need Democrats who are not afraid of that. And I think you've got some really good examples out there. You know, AOC speaks her mind. Representative Jamie Raskin, Jasmine Crockett is amazing. She speaks her mind all the time. And that's why I think these people are getting such a following is because it's refreshing to think this politician's like me. You know, they're not trying to hide from anything. They're speaking their mind. They're out loud and proud in front. I did a public event the other day and I had a beer in my hand. You know, oh no, everybody would always tell you, you know, put the beer down. But my response is like, hey, if you say a politician that you want to have a beer with, why not take that literally? Like I drink beer. I don't want to pretend I don't, you know, so here I am. And so that's I think the recipe is, look, there's a lot of policies where obviously we think we're in the right. And things like expanding Medicaid, common sense gun legislation like safe storage, or restoring reproductive rights above the 6-week ban. There's things like that that we've got 60-70% of voters on our side with. But they're not going to listen to us until we start presenting to them as the type of energetic and honest leaders that they want to see. And so I think Democrats have got to do a vibe shift, a tone shift to come correct with voters, and then voters will respond by being more engaged in the process and voting with us on our key issues.
So before we go, I got a question. Do you think that having the right public service commission in office will help with these data centers and increasing bills?
So when you talk about the Public Service Commission, I want to make sure everybody, all your listeners know that is a statewide office that has a group of people who are charged with regulating the utilities like Georgia Power. So when you're asking, why is my power bill going up so much? It's not even summer, or if it is summer, it's way more than you think it's going to be. And that's because the Public Service Commission, these elected officials, are letting that happen. They are bending over backwards for Georgia Power. And every time Georgia Power asks for a rate increase, the Public Service Commissioners say, how much do you want, right? People can debate nuclear power all day, but it's no dispute that Plant Vogtle, the nuclear power project in Georgia, is overrunning its costs. And instead of Georgia Power reducing its profits, because they are making profits in response to that, they're passing the bill to the consumers. So just to be very clear, when you say Public Service Commission, that's another example of what we're talking about with courageous leadership, where we've got some PSC commissioners right now that don't want to stand up to Georgia Power. And we've got 2 elections coming up this year that everybody needs to be aware of in 2 different districts. But you got to find your district and make sure you know who you're voting for.
Absolutely.
But we've got PSC candidates who could help to right the ship, who could get into that space and start using their voice and not be intimidated by Georgia Power.
So basically, in my words, you have public service commissioners that has gotten into bed with Georgia Power, and whatever Georgia Power say do, they doing it for the money or the kickbacks, I call it.
Well, and I can't say with any specificity what the commissioners are getting out of it, but I will say this: they're paid a pretty good salary, and their elections are only every 6 years, and because of the court cases, they haven't even had those elections recently. So people have been serving for a really long time. So it's one of the cushiest jobs you can have in government, where you are basically there to make Georgia Power happy. Well, if you serve the way they do, and then you make big money doing it. So what incentive do they have to do anything different? So that's why the people have to step in. The people have to make their voice heard in an election setting to say, we're not cool with commissioners just, chilling and coasting and doing whatever Georgia Power wants. We want people who are actually going to take care of the rate-paying consumers.
Let me ask you a question. Do you think right now, during the climate that we're in, if Georgia Democrats stick together and get on one accord, that it's a possibility that we can flip some of these seats back blue?
Absolutely. I wouldn't even be talking to you right now as a statewide candidate if I didn't think that we could win in 2026. So remember in 2018, how much work we did. We had 60, I want to say it was 64 seats in the Georgia House. There's 180.
Yeah.
So there's 91 is a majority. So 90 is a halfway point. So we had 64 seats. And we flipped 14 for a net flip of 11. So we went from 64 to 75 in one cycle. And I was one of those flips. I flipped a Republican district up in Sandy Springs, Roswell, Johns Creek. My joke about that district is that every time you say the next city name, your eyebrows go up a little further because you're like, Johns Creek, really? We got Democrats all the way up there now, right? And so the blue wave went out pretty far in the suburbs. And now we have around 80 Democrats in the state house. So we're only 5-10 away from things getting really interesting in the state house. On the Senate side, like I said, we got 23 Democrats, 28 is the halfway point for 56. So we need 6 Senate seats to flip. There's 2 or 3 where that's not a crazy thing to suggest, even with a gerrymandered map by 2026. So that's progress that's happening. Plus these statewides. we've got two Democratic United States senators, one of them who was elected twice to the role. And so that proves Georgia's not a red state in the sense that we have the potential to win statewide races. We're a purple state now. And so I think, you look at the polling compared like now where compared to where we were in 2017 when Trump took office the first time, he's doing even worse. And I think that people are even more sick of the chaos and the uncertainty, even just 100 days into the administration. So yeah, 2026 is shaping up to be a big year. And look, for all the wrong reasons, I wish this weren't happening to Georgia and the United States, but Democrats have got to be ready for that opportunity if it happens.
Let me ask you a question, because you were part of that blue wave back then. Now let me ask you this, and this is gonna be a sensitive question,
Okay.
but I'm gonna ask.
I'll answer any question you got. So
what do you think would happen when Stacey Abrams ran and everybody, there was that blue wave, but then when Vice President Harris came along and ran, the white women say that they were going to support, but when it came down to Stacey Abrams and Vice President Harris, the white women reneged. Why do you think that took place?
I am not going to comment on, specific races, genders, whatever, because, I don't want to generalize because there's lots of different white women, there's lots of different white men and black women.
Right.
Right. But what I will say is if you look at the polling numbers, that white people are supporting Trump at margins that are way higher than black voters are. And black voters have been the core of the Democratic constituency, black women especially, in terms of coming out to support Harris and other Democrats. And the first thing I want to say is that if somebody like me in my position doesn't listen to black women about where Democrats should be going, then I'm in for a world of hurt. And I don't know how to do my job if that's what I'm doing, right? And so I think, I will say, I think that we've got to trust black voters and listen to black voters when it comes to how do you win in Georgia? What are our priorities going to be in Georgia? And we did see a loss of, certainly white voters at the levels that they voted at for Trump, but also we lost some black and Latino voters in 2024. And I think some of that has to do with this idea of who's going to look out for the American dream and small business. And Trump was just polling better on the economy. I don't think he should have been. I think that he was getting away with lies, but he was peeling off voters because he was promising to look out for people's American dream. Well, where are we now? 100 days in with tariffs on everybody and small businesses hurting and going under and consumers worried about higher prices, he clearly did not keep his promises on that. And so I think there is an opportunity for some of the black and Latino voters that Democrats have lost to be very plain and say, look, this American dream still exists, the one that you're voting for, but it's not going to be Trump and it's not going to be Republicans who are not worried about the little guy who's going to get you there, right? And so that is the way I'm thinking about the racial dynamics, is that we are losing voters that we historically as Democrats have gotten a lot of support from, but we can't take voters for granted, any voters. We've got to go out of our way to pitch to people and meet them where they are, meet their needs. And so that's what we're trying to do this cycle, is really make that messaging very robust.
Do you think, given that what's taking place, that's taking place over the first 100 days, if we had election tomorrow for the president of the United States, do you think those Latino, everybody that voted for Trump, do you think they will vote a different way?
I couldn't say with certainty what would happen tomorrow. I think it'd be very close. Trump might lose if the election were held today. And part of the issue is you look at his approval rating. He's in the tank right now. He's at like 40%, lower in some cases based on the poll than he was in 2017, like I said. But it is a frustrating but an inevitable part of American democracy that the pendulum swings. And so, you go this way and people start worrying about Joe Biden for whatever reason. And then you vote in Trump and it's like, oh my goodness, 100 days in, look how much chaos. And so it's very frustrating to have to wait until 2026 or 2028 to respond to that. But I do think that voters remember the pain they feel. And I don't think that the pain that is happening right now with the tariffs and the terrorizing of communities. You got federal agents who are plainclothes, who do not even identify themselves as ICE, who are going to, I mean, they're trying to get into childcare centers to get kids. And like we know that US citizen kids have been deported alongside their parents. So, people are scared right now. People feel like it's a level of uncertainty they have not seen before. It's not like in 12 months from now, they're just going to forget all this happened. And it may even be worse. So I think the type of pain that Trump and his administration are inflicting right now is going to be felt by Americans for a long time.
Do you think the gun law should be tightened up more?
There's stuff around the edges. Like you can protect the Second Amendment without going crazy. I mean, the problem is Republicans right now want to go crazy. You had a bill in the state house. So I'm in the Senate, right? In the state house, there was a bill to do safe storage, which is basically just a requirement. Look, you can't just leave a gun lying around because you hear all these tragic stories of like a toddler picking up a firearm, right? So
Yeah.
it's just a basic. I mean, you can't argue with it. Most people can't argue with that, right? It's like the most basic protection possible to just do basic gun safety. And if you're a responsible gun owner, that's something you already do. And so it's not like some crazy government mandate or some sort of like a curtailing of your rights. You can still have whatever guns you want. But that bill got out of the House, and guess what happened? The state Senate what's called stripped it. So they took out all the language about safe storage, and the Senate Republicans tried to put in a 14-day gun tax holiday, meaning sales tax exemption on a bunch of guns and ammunition and silencers and stuff. That is not what we need. We do not need to give people more reason to buy guns. People already buy a bunch of guns. What we need is the common sense stuff. And there's things like bump stocks, which can turn a semi-automatic into an automatic. There's modifications, extended magazines to guns that, from any practical standpoint, people just don't need for everyday life. And so I think the thing that Democrats are trying to get across in terms of guns is we're not coming for your guns. We just want to do the most basic guardrails. And all these people who are crying hysterically on the far right extreme Republican side of, oh, they're coming for your guns, they're lying to you. They're trying to gin up fear to make it sound like Democrats want to attack the Second Amendment. But there's, like I said, when you talk to these families who are grieving because they were involved in a school shooting or their kids are scared to go to school or they do these drills, I think the country's had enough. We don't want to live this way. We don't have to live this way. If we just did some basic things to make sure that the extremists did not get everything they wanted on guns.
Let me ask you a question. I don't know if it's happening up in your area, up in Alpharetta and Sandy Springs, Johns Creek. But let me ask you, how do you feel about these investors buying all the homes up in these communities and then turning some of the community into slum subdivisions?
It's horrible. So this is actually one of the biggest policy issues in the whole country right now is out-of-state investors who buy up, as you say, all of these single-family homes, and then they turn them into rentals or they don't have people on the ground to try to manage it. Here's a bill that Representative Mary Margaret Oliver did just this past session to require those out-of-state landlords to have somebody on site in person. They've got to have at least one person in Georgia who you can call with complaints or whatever. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, that's really good legislation. But what we need is a federal response. And I think Senator Ossoff is looking into this issue now. I know that. But what we need is some modification of federal housing laws, because the way that realtors have explained it to me, right now, you can't, at the state level, you can't discriminate against types of buyers, even if they're corporate buyers. You can't say these people are allowed to buy these houses, but these people aren't. And there's some good like anti-discrimination aspect to that, but it's gotten out of control now because if you can't limit the corporate landlords, then they're going to do what they're doing, which is run completely wild and buy up all of America's housing stock and then turn everything into, one big corporation where people are, begging for their rent payments not to go up. So that's not the kind of world we want to live in. So ultimately, I mean, I'll do everything I can legally at the state level to help with that problem. But the federal government is really where you've got to focus all the advocacy efforts, because they've got to tweak the Fair Housing Act and change some things to make sure we can rein in these corporate landlords.
Now let me ask you why we on the housing. How do you feel about the Georgia, the senators and representatives passing a bill to take control, the HOA control out of the association? Do you think that caused problems?
Well, there was HOA activity this year. I'm not sure that anything finally passed this year because we're looking at different approaches. But I think the issue is the people who are skeptical of HOAs say, they're worried about foreclosures, worried about, if you miss two fees, HOA monthly fees, then all of a sudden there's foreclosure proceedings. So I agree that there should be some common sense process. The bottom line is whatever we do, we want to make sure that people don't lose their homes just like that because an HOA board decides, you're 30 days late, now you got to give up where you live. But the alternative to that is that HOAs are elected and the community elects them. And so they have to maintain some basic standards for the community, right?
But let me, and I think people get this confused. It's a difference between a HOA and a POA. A POA can take your property. A HOA can only put a lien on your property.
Right.
And I think that's where people getting it confused. Now, if you sign, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, if you sign up when you buy your home and you're in a POA, you're signing up that you understand that document your bylaws. So you're saying if you miss your payments or something, that they have the right to take your home.
When yeah, I mean, they may be more direct, I think, but the thing with a lien is still an instrument that eventually can lead to a foreclosure, right? So that, the all paths sort of lead to the same thing because that's the nuclear weapon, right? That's the biggest thing that you can do to somebody if they're not in compliance is, force them to sell their home to cover whatever lien or debt they might have. But I think what most people want on this issue is just balance, right? Nobody should be able to run wild in the community with no oversight, no rules.
Right.
But meanwhile, a handful, 3-4 people should not be able to decide who gets to stay in their homes unilaterally. So it's working out that balance that matters.
Right. Let me ask you this. We're about 8 minutes, and I could sit here all day and talk to you. Let me ask you a question. Running for lieutenant governor, and this is not endorsement, I'm asking a question so people won't say I'm endorsing you.
Sure.
Tell me, what is the benefits of being a lieutenant governor?
So you stand up there in front of the Senate and you've got the gavel and you conduct business and you make rulings one way or the other. If somebody makes a motion, you can deny that motion or not recognize it. Now the majority will be Republican if I win. At least this time in 2027, it probably very likely would be. So they could strip some of my powers away, or they could, sort of mess with me to make it harder for me to do my job. But the real value of having somebody up there is they set the tone. So you and I today have been speaking about what Democrats can do better. How do people show leadership? And I think a big part of it is setting the tone. What's happening in Washington with Trump is crazy. And we need state leaders who can acknowledge that and who can fight back and who can, call up our South Korean trading partners and say, Georgia's not crazy, even if DC is, and we want you to keep doing business here. Or amplifying the stories of people who are affected, right? When you have the gavel and when you set the tone, you get to speak with a clear mind about these things. And you have to force the Senate to deal with that narrative. Right now, they're all clapping for each other, right? They're all, it's like a country club mentality of everybody sort of, good on you, golf clap, right? You did a good job. And Brian Kemp, when he gives a state of the state, all the Republicans stand up and they clap and they act like nothing's wrong, right? And part of the problem is what I say a minute ago about you got to know what the problem is before you can start to solve it. You got to amplify, hey, we've got an issue before you can organize and get the political will necessary for the public to say, we're not okay with that. We want something different. So the biggest power of having that gavel, because I wouldn't get to vote in the Senate, the 56 senators vote, but when you preside over the Senate, you don't get a vote yourself. But you get to set that tone and you get to make sure the public is informed through media and otherwise about what's really happening in their house. And I think that, if I win, there's a great likelihood that we would have a Democratic governor also. And so then you become a team player. Now you are working with the governor, and I've got 7 years of relationships and more in the Capitol. So I can help coordinate with whoever might win governor and make sure that everybody's rowing together. We're all moving with one accord. And it's a fundraising role. Being in a leadership position with the Senate Democratic Caucus, we want that Senate caucus to flip. We want to have control of the Senate by 2030, 2031, when we do redistricting again. And so being in the lieutenant governor role is a platform that I can use to help fundraise, to help build momentum for Senate Democrats, so that we can do that same blue wave that we've been talking about and flip the Senate so that we have an opportunity to bring better justice, better policy for working people in Georgia. So this is a multi-year plan. I mean, I am not thinking of this. Some people run for lieutenant governor because it's got governor in the title, right? They're just waiting their turn. But, I'm a little bit of a performer. I've got a comedy background. I ran the comedy show at my law school. And I see the value in being able to have a bully pulpit, to be able to stand up there and influence the narrative. And so that's really what I'm excited about. And that's what I'm pitching. I don't need to run everything. I don't got to control everything. But to be able to tell Georgia's story so that Georgians can see it reflected and make the right choices, that would mean the world to me.
Let me ask you a question. When we go off of the YouTube, you might have some questions in the chat.
Sure.
Would you go back and look at them for me, please, and kind of answer those if you have time? Whenever
I'll
you
yeah.
time. Whenever you time. Let me ask you this. Is it any truth in the U.S. House members are proposing to slash the Medicare care?
I believe that they'll do it if they can get away with it. The Republicans in the U.S. House want to do that, right? But they're worried that people are watching. Because look, all their corporate donors and their big money donors are saying that they want tax cuts. Well, how do you pay for tax cuts? You got to slash programs. That's the only way the math works. And so if you're going to give all the rich people tax cuts, the billionaires who already, pay an effective tax rate that's lower than working people, the only way to pay for that is to slash these programs that people depend on. So they absolutely want to do it. The question is whether they'll get away with it, because if we are paying close enough attention and we're loud enough about it, then they feel politically like they can't. But we got to keep paying attention.
Let me ask you, under the Gold Dome this session, didn't Governor Kemp sign a bill that he would give Georgia folks, I think, $250, $500?
Well, he has all that surplus, right? We had all the Biden COVID money that came and made our coffers flush, and we collected more tax revenue than we expected because the economic rebound was good during Biden. And so they had billions of dollars, and instead of investing, I mean, look, our prisons were falling apart. We have behavioral health needs, mental health needs across the board that need investment. But rather than make those investments, Kemp decided he would give everybody a little money back. Now, look, nobody's arguing about having 250 back, 500 back for married people. I mean, I voted for those rebates because I'm not going to say no if we're going to give some money back. But let's be real. When rent costs what it costs, when groceries are going up, is 250 or 500 really going to make up for all of the inequalities in the economy? It's not. And I think at some point it gets insulting because you're like, you're really going to go on TV and crow about how you gave me back 250? Like, what is that going to do?
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. In 250, I think I spent that last week just on potato chips and candy, and I think I got 2 packs of meat, and it was that. So
and it's done. That's right. That's right.
Well, we down to the wire. In your closing, what you want to say to the people in your closing?
I want to say the Democrats are ready for you. We're ready to lead in 2026. We're going to right the ship. There's too much chaos right now, and Democrats are coming correct. We are going to speak to the bigger issues. We need to fundamentally remake this economy somehow, get ahead of things like climate change, restore reproductive rights, expand Medicaid. We're going to do all the things we said we were going to do. But the most important thing right now is people are over this kind of chaos. We don't want this chaos anymore. We need mature adults in the room who are ready to lead. That's the kind of campaign I want to run, and I'd be honored to have the support of anybody watching.
Thank you. Now I got this, so I'm going to read this because I love this question. Democrats need to come together as one, get behind one candidate that they know who's going to win, and support that Democrat ticket. That go from the top of the ticket to the bottom of the ticket. That go for the governor all the way down. We don't need 5 or 6 people, which we know gonna happen in a race, splitting votes. I think we Democrats need to get in the room. I think y'all need to cuss, holler, shout, drink y'all beer, and come back with a slate.
Well, Miss Chapman, that's why I got out early. I got out in May of 2025 because, look, I've been in the Senate 3 years and know how it works, and I think I'd be a good choice for that role, Lieutenant Governor, to preside over the Senate. Same room. I'm just trying to move 20, 30 feet in the same room to a different, better seat.
Well, we gonna keep watching you and stay tuned for other stuff. We gonna watch you again. I want to thank all the viewers that tune in today. I want to thank my guest, Senator, for coming out, taking the call. Season finale. We'll come back in September with new shows, new lineup, and we look forward of hearing from the people that's in running for these elections. Thank you. You stepped out there. So we gonna see who else gonna step out behind you.
I took a stand.
Yeah, you took a stand. Thank you. I want you to stay on for a few minutes after we go off, Senator. But again, I want to thank you guys. Remember, we got an important election coming up. That's the Public Service Commissioner for District 2. And I think, is it 6 or 4?
I'm not remembering the number off the top of my head.
Well, we got two important elections. Sure. And down on the south side in Fulton County, throughout that area, I know it's District 2. If I'm not mistaken, I think it's District 2. But if I'm wrong, just look that information up. Please go out and vote. It is very important. If you don't vote for the right person for that election, don't cry about our electric bills going up. You heard it. Your PSC stands along with Georgia Power and all the big investors. So it's in your hand now. Thank you. You guys have a great summer. And remember, this is an election year. Thank you.